So we're back with another episode of Earnest Medicine. We have been pumping these things out, which is awesome. I have to say, I went to the Valor conference here in Washington, D.C., and that was something for me where a lot of these old war heroes, right? It's the story that we always talk about.
Yes.
And I can't tell you how many of these guys have served their country in a really amazing way, but at the root of it all, we got to document a piece of history with each and every single one of those individuals, and it was so miraculous that now that footage is out there. You know, that person's story and that history is available for anyone and everyone to go in and say, "Hey, I get to witness a little piece of history. It's not lost." And the same thing with Earnest Medicine, right?
Yeah, it's storytelling. Yeah, that's all. The base of it is storytelling. Absolutely. Because if we don't capture this, then there won't be an opportunity for people to have a voice, get heard, or give consideration for things. I mean, when you hear these stories from these veterans, for somebody who's never been in combat, it's like, whoa, you know,
am I
that,
listening to?
Yeah. So it's kind of like, in a sense, getting into somebody else's shoes, their experience, and there's a connection. I mean, the storytelling is a sense of, you know, that oral, visual experience, but it is, for me, it is, how do I connect?
Right.
Like, what are the roots of, you know, that person and their story, and then my story and how they intersect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the really cool thing I think about Earnest Medicine, especially with you being in the medical space and getting to hear practitioner stories, patient stories. That's where that connection is for us. Very excited to have Dr. Jonathan Fields in with us today. I'm going to read this because he provided us with a really wonderful outline, and it will give at least a brief overview of everything this gentleman has accomplished up to this point and what's next. So Dr. Jonathan Fields is a renowned integrative medicine practitioner, martial and visual artist, author, and speaker. He owns 2 clinics in South Florida where he specializes in acupuncture, functional medicine, herbs, PRP, stem cells, and IV therapy. He holds a doctorate and a master's of acupuncture and Eastern medicine, a bachelor's in health sciences, and 4 national board certifications. He's lectured at universities, Fortune 500 companies, works with elite pro athletes, and formulated for public trading companies. This is Dr. Jonathan Fields. So we're going to roll our intro. We'll be right back with his introduction. We're going to go ahead and come back from our break. Welcome back to Earnest Medicine. I want to turn it over for Dr. Jonathan Fields' introduction. Here is our guy. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience. Thank you, Doctor.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jonathan Fields. I think you did a wonderful job introducing me already. Now I have to live up to the hype, but I'm honored to be on the show, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
It's an honor.
Absolutely. So I'll turn it over here to Dr. Brown and Dr. Jonathan Fields. Very interested to have you guys kind of get into this and hear a little bit of origin from our guest.
Yeah. So, I mean, Jonathan, so you and I first interacted, I mean, we never met each other, right? But we interacted in a way in taking care of a patient mutually. And from that experience, you know, it's, you know, we're running side by side, as opposed to never having met you before, but understanding what your mission is and what you try to do for your clients aligns very much with what I do. And so that was like, it was a no-brainer that, you know, it's like, hey, what's your story? Mm-hmm. Because if we don't capture those stories unique, then, you know, look, everything can be cookie cutter. We just had somebody who's interested in becoming a physician, a young person who wants to begin that journey. And do they see any other option other than just joining the factory work, right?
Right.
So what's your story? Where are you from?
I've been in South Florida most of my life. I was born in Israel originally on a little farm in the Galil in the middle of nowhere, a small, tiny town with about 100 houses. Moved here to the U.S. when I was about 7 years old. Been here ever since, and grew up in suburbs, South Florida. It's a beautiful area. The weather is great, except for a couple months of hurricane season. Other than that, we love it out here. You know, the people are nice. We don't have any of the snow to deal with like you guys over there. So
well,
I'm
global warming, we don't have snow anymore, so that's great.
What was it today? 68?
Well, that's true. And from the looks of it, it looks like I might need to move in the next 20, 30 years anyway. So I might be coming up your way. At least halfway.
You're always welcome. Fantastic.
I appreciate it.
Well, I wanted to ask a really quick question because this was one of the points that we sort of resonated on whenever we spoke initially, and that's that you have approached the medical space from a very sort of kinetic, active position. I mean, you have a background in martial arts, and I think that that's something that has translated now from your early years into what you're doing now, even working with pro athletes, some former UFC world champions, people of that nature. Can you tell us a little bit about the motivations that you experienced as a young person and why you sort of navigated in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from a medical family. My mom's an occupational therapist. That's been her entire career since I was born. My father was a medic in the Israeli army for the time that he was there. And my brother is a hospitalist. He's an internal medicine doctor and board certified in obesity medicine. But having some experiences within the medical system, I went a little outside the box from the traditional conventional medicine. Mm-hmm. I've been in martial arts most of my life since I was a little kid, as long as I can remember, pretty much. When I was in my 20s, about 25, I met one of my mentors, who's my Qigong master. He's an acupuncturist. And I started practicing the Qigong, which is like Tai Chi, but strictly medical, a lot of breathing, slow, moving meditation, almost like yoga, but mostly performed standing up, and very different visualizations, very different philosophy behind it, but you get some of the similar benefits, a little bit of overlap in the health benefits there. So it was so profound for me personally that I became fascinated with it. And I kind of started leaning a big part of my martial arts practice towards the healing arts. And I started studying with my mentor. I would intern with him at his medical clinic. I would help him with his seminar. I taught for over 15 years at the same school I'm with now for about 20 years. And eventually, throughout that time, about 7 to 8 years into that journey, I guess I must have been about 30 years old, I got extremely ill, very, very ill, to the point where I was disabled. I couldn't work. I lost my business. I lost my relationships.
Oh my God.
My family life was pretty much ruined. And what was going on was basically I was having hot flashes, chills, fatigue, depression, carpal tunnel, tendonitis, systemic joint pain. Every joint in my entire body was hurting all the time. And my back and my neck was so bad. I physically could not sit in a chair and work on a computer anymore. Before that, besides the martial arts, I was into DJing and art. And my full time was basically, my first degree was in digital media.
Oh my God.
So I was a graphic designer. I used to do social media marketing, web design, all that kind of stuff. And it got to the point where I physically could not work anymore. I spent a whole year going from doctor to specialist to specialist. I saw endocrinologists. They did biopsies on my thyroid. They did all my labs. I saw orthopedic doctors, 3 different neurologists, hand surgeons. They wanted to operate on me for carpal tunnel 2 different times, and I never did it. And all they kept telling me is, for the most part, that it's all in your head. Here's some muscle relaxers. Here's some pain pills. Your blood work's fine. Go home. And I just could not accept that. I had been healthy my whole life. I had a very good diet, or at least I thought. I tried to go vegan a couple of times, but I didn't eat any processed food, any junk food. So I should have been healthy. I was exercising probably 2 hours a day or more every single day, maybe 5, 6 days a week, sometimes longer, right? So there's no reason I should have been going through this. And I just felt so disparaged as a young, 30-year-old business owner who has insurance in America. I should be able to get professional medical assistance.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Nope.
And you know what? Then they start telling you it's all in your head. It's anxiety. And then you begin to question yourself. You're like, am I crazy? Is this really all in my head? And after suffering for about a year and progressively getting worse and worse and worse, my family was like, we're sick of hearing it. The doctor said, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. Go back to work. And eventually I walked into a friend of mine's vitamin store, and he's another one of my mentors. He's a nutrition formulator. He's on the scientific advisory board, and he invents vitamins. He works with MDs and big companies to invent vitamins. And I walked in, and the first thing he says to me is, you look like crap. So I tell him the whole story. I had already known him for about 10 years. We used to go there since I was in high school just to get protein or creatine or whatever, multis. And he says, oh, you're fine. You're healthy. I'm going to get you better. I know what's wrong. And I don't believe him, because I've already seen, a dozen different doctors. And I'm thinking, listen, you sell vitamins in a retail store. You're sitting here in sneakers and shorts. How are you going to help me? Right? The doctors can't help me. No way. But I said, at this point, I got nothing left to lose. And he takes good care of me. Doesn't even charge me for anything. We had a relationship. I used to do some of his advertising with him. So it was kind of like barter. And he just said, here, take this. He gives me some stuff, a few different nutrients within a week, maybe 2 weeks. No more hot flashes, no more chills, no more fatigue, no more depression, gone. Like that. After over a year of it getting progressively worse. Puts me with a chiropractor. I start seeing my acupuncturist. They had me change my diet a little bit. They had me start eating meat again. Stop drinking green tea so I wouldn't be like as dehydrated or whatever was going on. And I just started getting better and better and better. And within like 6 to 8 months, I had 100% recovery. And having lived through that experience, which was devastating. I mean, I was almost ready to check out. It was really, really bad. And, and for somebody who's always healthy to suddenly be chronically ill, it's devastating, right? Yeah. You're not used to, for people who I think are chronically ill, it's just like, one more symptom to add to the list. But when you go
one more pill,
super healthy to super sick, it's it's like the end of your world. So after living through that experience, I wanted to help other people. And I was already interested in the Eastern medicine and the acupuncture, and it's a very holistic system where we look for root causes of problems. And it was almost like, God spoke to me, and I knew I really did not have a choice. I felt like this is the only thing I could do. I have no other path. So I went back to school, went back and did a Bachelor's in Health Sciences, then a Master's, and then a Doctorate in Eastern medicine and acupuncture. I've studied in China. I've lived in the Shaolin temple, training Kung Fu with the monks 8 hours a day, and studied in the hospitals over there, doing herbal medicine and all sorts of other stuff. And I'm still studying, right? I was at a conference this weekend. We're always doing continuing education, I think, in the medical field. But that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Well, the story doesn't stop there. I mean, it is a matter of perspective. What are the things that have affected your life? And the thing that I think is most important is you went through the normal channels, what was expected, right? But the issue is that you actually chose to take care of your own health as opposed to being passive about it, right? You decided to make a change for yourself, but you got to that point, for some patients who are maybe older or they have other conditions. I think it's wrong for patients to be left powerless without any other option or choice. I think it is a personal journey somebody has to go through. And, unfortunately in our healthcare system, it's just factory work. I mean, there's no sense of the individual. One of the things that, I always, when I start off with a patient is, how many medications are you taking? Okay, well, let's see how many we can come off of, and this is like, wait a minute, I've been taking this for a long time. I'm like, but
you're still sick.
Yeah. I mean, and so it's important for viewers to understand that sense of being active and not being passive. And always, I think as a physician, I'm always curious. And I think the problem with healthcare is that it doesn't give enough time for clinicians to really sit and talk and listen and actually touch and experience. Because how can you expect in a cubicle, a little room that's sterile, that has nothing in it, to get in 10 minutes and know, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that's a system doomed for failure, and you changed that. You educated yourself. So I think that's inspiring. It should be that, and that's kind of what I expect of my patients. I don't expect them to just take what I tell them. It's a relationship, and if they're all in, I'm all in, and we can get there. And it's not going to get done in a day, but there's an opportunity. So, I think that's fantastic.
Well, I wanted to bring up a point because you had a really pivotal thing happen in your life that was a transition for you. I mean, you were a young guy, a business owner, healthy, very active, and all of a sudden that's sort of crashing down around you. and you took a rather drastic change in your direction. You had to, and you said that.
But no choice.
Yours was really quite fascinating because it took you abroad. It took you to these places all around the globe, and I think change for all of us looks a little bit different, but yours is quite fascinating. I'd love to get more details on how you were connected with these individuals, specifically your master, and how, what were the steps that you took in order to move in that direction with some level of fluidity. I know there had to be some anxiety attached to that stuff, but I'd love to hear it from you. How did that all go down?
Absolutely, yeah, and I appreciate that. Well, I kind of lucky because I grew up in a family of travelers. My folks like to travel. They would take us on trips as kids, so I think we were never scared or anxiety. I think at that point didn't really play a role for me. But also because I knew what I wanted and I knew where I was going to go and I was going to make it happen regardless. And so the first time, or when we went to stay with the monks in China, so I had spent quite a bit of time trying to contact different schools out there, trying to find out who can give us this program where we can do the martial arts stuff and practice the spiritual component and learn about the meditation and some of the lifestyle, the philosophy, and have the medical component as well, where we can actually work with doctors and herbalists and acupuncturists and Tui Na, where it's basically their body work with like chiropractic and bone setting and all that. And it took a little bit of time because the majority of the schools that I contacted said, no, we don't want anything to do with that. We do just Kung Fu. You come in, this is a program, leave us alone. They barely speak any English over there to begin with, so it's very difficult. After some time, I got very lucky. I found a school where the woman who was, in charge or running the management of the school happened to be from Romania and lived in England and lived in Greece as well. So she spoke English pretty well, and so we were able to have a translator. And my teacher, my Shaolin Shifu, I got a few different martial arts teachers depending on styles, but my Shaolin Shifu is basically very much into the medicinal component, and he actually lives the monk lifestyle. He grew up living in the Shaolin temple since he was old. And at the time, he had his own academy, walking distance from the temple, in the temple national park grounds. So they said, you know what, we don't normally do this. It's never really been done here as a program. Every now and then they'll get some people that come in for like a day and they'll observe a little bit in the clinic or whatever. But they said, if you give us enough leeway, if you bring some people with you, we'll set up a special program for you. So I think I was still in school at the time. My master's and my doctorate was done here in Fort Lauderdale at Atlantic Institute of Oriental Medicine. It's been there for about 30 years. They do just Eastern medicine. And I took a group of 9 students. So it was myself with 8 others that we were, I guess, about 2/3 of the way with my master's at the time. And the first time we went for about a month, and we were able to set this up where we'd have a 4-hour lunch break every day, and we would spend that time. We would have lunch, and we'd spend that time with the doctors. And the routine was amazing. You'd wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and from 5:30 to 6, you would meditate. And from 6 to 6:30, you would practice Qigong. And from 6:30 to 7, you would do Tai Chi. And then you would have breakfast. And after about an hour and a half, you would do 4 hours of super intense Kung Fu training. I'm talking about like professional athletic training. These guys do shows all over the world. The Shaolin monks are actually known for having some of the toughest conditioning in the world. And then you'd have a 4-hour lunch break where most people would rest and have lunch. And we would just have lunch and study with the doctors. And then after the lunch break, you would do another 3 to 4 hours of training. Then you'd have dinner. Then sometimes after dinner, we might train for another hour or so afterwards, just kind of practicing some of the things we had learned throughout the day. So it was a fascinating experience. They have in the temple, which is 1,500 years old, they have a clinic associated with it. So they took us to study with the doctors in the temple, and sometimes the doctors would come and teach us at the academy. And we basically got to learn a little bit of everything, a little bit of the herbs, acupuncture, the mugwort that they burn, the Tui Na, the body work, in addition to the Kung Fu. And at the same time, we went to the nearest town. We studied in some of the clinics and the hospitals over there as well. The next year I went back, which was 3 of us, my wife and another classmate of mine. At that point, we had just finished a master's, and we were going right from the master's into the doctorate program. We had about 2.5 month break, and we spent 6 weeks in China at that point. I think I spent 2 weeks traveling in Romania before that. So we went back again and kind of went through the whole same experience, and then spent a few weeks in a hospital as well, working in an integrative hospital. Most of the hospitals in China are actually complete Western medicine, completely conventional medicine. There's very few that actually practice the traditional medicine. We happened to find one. We got very lucky. It was actually somebody we met on the plane from the year before on the way home. They had the hookup. And this hospital was the first traditional hospital that they opened in Beijing after they brought back the Eastern medicine. Because originally Mao had banned all the Eastern medicine because they thought it was too religious or spiritual practices, and the party kind of didn't want to have any of that. But what had happened was they found that for 1 billion people, they didn't have enough Western trained doctors. They didn't have enough medicine. They didn't have enough, right? So they brought it back. So in 1952, they opened this Beijing Gulo Hospital, and the people who opened it were actually descendants of the doctors the imperial doctors that took care of the royal family.
Oh, wow.
Before all that. Wow. So it was an amazing opportunity. We got to train and learn from some of the cream of the crop and study with the president of the Beijing University of Chinese Medicine.
How cool.
I think when you put yourself out there and you have a goal and people know that you're genuine, connections just open up, things just fall into place. Kind of like how we met, taking care of a VIP patient, and it just, we hit it off. I think I love Dr. Brown's approach to medicine is you're not your typical, right, doctor. You will spend time with the patient. And like you had mentioned medications before, right? You come in and they're on 20 different meds prescribed by 7 different doctors, and the doctors haven't even read the charts. They don't know what meds are on. They don't know if there's any interactions going on, and they don't really care, right? You got 5 minutes.
Yeah, and I would say the system's broken. And so if you're somebody you're just trying to get through the day, when you've got 30 patients you need to see, you got 10 minutes and you don't even own the practice, you're just a factory worker, and you've got somebody who's a practice manager who's telling you need to see more patients in this period of time. It's a system of failure. When the system itself is sick, how can you expect any good from that, right? So that's why my dad had an expression that sometimes you just got to let it burn. Maybe that's a little bit graphic, but sometimes the truth is that you don't try to fix something that's continuously just failing, and you just go in a different direction.
Right. Yeah. And I will say that our previous guest, Dr. Uli Chittapelli, he's out in California. He made a really interesting analogy, which was essentially, we're like on not myself, but individuals in the medical space are on a treadmill of sorts, and they're just continuously running up this thing, and someone else is controlling the dials. They're cranking that speed higher, they're increasing the incline, and you get to a point where this individual is so burned out and so tired that you have no choice but to fall off.
Yeah, and it sucks because these are individuals that, are intelligent and driven, but the system beats them. You just have to look at the satisfaction rates, the suicide rates, the divorce rates, all of those things just tell you this is bad. And that's the important point. Why what we're trying to do is share these stories and experiences, because we want to go to other countries. I'll be going to Istanbul on Friday, and part of that will be to look at, their healthcare system.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
And set up and we have already set up a connection, just like you've kind of described, with a group that does medical tourism. So people will come from all over for things that are done in Turkey because they have the skills, but also when you look at the comparison for what's here in the U.S., I have a patient who had $50,000 worth of dental work done. God. So I sent the invoice to a buddy of mine in Turkey, and I said, hey, how much would this cost there? He was like, they could stay at the beach for about 2 weeks and get their flight and get the dental work done over several days in a relaxed environment. It would be about $3,000. I was like, good grief. So there's so many of these different things. I really want to explore the stories. I really want to be able to share different experiences, that there isn't just one way of doing it. When we look at the U.S. and how much we spend on healthcare, 20%, it's sickening to see that, because other countries spend, a quarter of that, and yet we're sicker. It's almost like we're cattle, and we're fed all of this just to be sick, because it's profitable. And I always, I hate to say it, but insurance companies are the mafia. In the pharmaceuticals, it's like, they come in and they toss a few things around and say, hey, yeah, you need this insurance. No, you don't. You go, you go to these other places, and then you realize something sparks in your head, and you have that international, travel experience, and so that's fortunate. I think one of the key things is that it almost should be mandatory that people leave this country to see other things. In Australia, they take a walkabout. They'll be gone. I've met Australians in the weirdest places, but it changes them. And I think one of our biggest problems is that we're too isolated, and that's easy for people to take advantage of. And that's the important part, is that it's not just open your mind. I'm not saying open your mind. Just don't let things take advantage of you. Empower yourself and don't be passive about it. Otherwise, people will profit off of you.
Yeah, and the system is obviously designed that way, right? We're 5% of the world's population. I think we're taking 60% of the world's drugs, something like that. That doesn't even make or promote a little bit sense. It makes no sense at all. That's why my brother's trying to go to the hospital now. We just opened a clinic together. He's been, I think probably about 10 years as a hospitalist, and he's just burned out on the corporate nonsense, them telling him how to manage a patient's care. And he's like, what can you do to make it better? He's like, I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to do what's best for the patient every single time. I don't care about your bottom line.
Yeah.
I wanted to briefly dive in here on a specific story that you discussed in your form with us about a young female patient in her 20s who was suffering from a really severe autoimmune disease and was really close to death. And I wanted to see about, how did some of your experiences and also your own struggle with health inform how you approached this case and how you took care of her to the best of your abilities?
Sure, absolutely. It was a tragic story, one of these that really shows off how badly our medical system is mismanaging stuff. This young girl came in. She was about 22 years old at the time, looked like she weighed maybe 90 pounds, walking with a cane, severe case of Ehlers-Danlos, which usually will come around with, mixed connective tissue disease, gastroparesis, electrical stimulator installed, still not working, couldn't eat or drink anything. She would emit every single thing. She came in, she had a PICC line in her arm. She was getting nutrition through a PICC line, ghost white, super fatigued, 10 different medications for a 21, 22-year-old. Had seen probably 30, 40 different doctors, was keeping immaculate medical records on her own. And, some of these doctors, the stories were horrifying. They had doctors that laughed at her. One doctor told her, you'll never get better. There's nobody that can help you. And I was empathetic. Having lived through a similar experience myself, not that severe, but to the point where I felt like I was getting there, I could totally get it. So I understand. So I had started with her. We started off doing some acupuncture. We started off doing some herbs. She would get some temporary relief, but not long. She would feel great immediately after, but the next day it was back to pain everywhere, constipation, problems with her cycle, still not eating. So I thought to myself, well, this is a pretty simple case, right? You're not getting any nutrition because you're not eating, and you look ghost white. You're anemic, right? This is bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you intramuscular vitamin injections. Seems pretty simple. I don't know why 40 other doctors couldn't figure that out. So I wasn't even running IVs at the clinic at the time, but I do injections. So I started giving her, B vitamins, vitamin C, glutathione. Her vitamin D levels had been chronically low. I think they were like 12 when she came in. Her whole life, she had tried to take vitamin D. She tried the capsules, the tablets. She tried the drops, and her levels do not come up no matter what. We started doing the injections, and I was injecting some minerals in there as well, too. So there was, I think, zinc and magnesium and a couple other ones. And I think that was, B12, B complex, vitamin C, glutathione, and some minerals, and vitamin D. And within a few weeks, maybe a month or two, a whole different person. No more cane. No more PICC line. She's eating. She's drinking. Signing up to, she started working part-time again. Went from 10 medications to 3 medications. A whole different person. Color started coming back. She's smiling again. Her cycle is getting better. And we're still doing herbs and acupuncture as well. But it was, that was one of the worst cases I've seen. I've seen a couple that are up there. But she didn't look like she was going to make it at all. And the depression, she still has an electrical stimulator installed. It hasn't been on for 3 to 4 years. She doesn't need it. They just haven't taken it out yet because they don't want to do another surgery on her. So it's just sitting there. She does have an occasional flare up, but she still managed with just the 3 medications and the herbs and the acupuncture and the vitamins. It's given her back quality of life, where she had absolutely zero. She's married. She, they're working on. They just moved, but she's working. Studying. She has interests. She can go out with friends, and I've seen quite a few cases like that. That one might have been one of the more extreme ones, but it's just an example of how broken the system is. And don't get me wrong, if I have an emergency, please take me to the nearest hospital. I don't want cupping. If I'm in a car accident, we'll save that for myofascial relief or something like that.
Sure.
But these kinds of chronic illnesses, autoimmune stuff, digestive stuff, on and on, thyroid, it's just it's terrible. And the doctors aren't listening to the patients. They're telling them like, well, your levels are fine, or we can't figure it out, and they're just like, go home, it's all in your head, it's anxiety. And it's terrible that we treat people like that. You wouldn't want somebody to treat your mother or your wife or your brother or your sister like that. So I think every patient there needs to be mutual respect between doctors and patients. And I think that's part of the problem. A lot of doctors are more interested in their bottom line, and they're very judgmental with the patients, and they're very dismissive of the patient's complaints, right? The patients come in and they're saying, hey, doc, I'm having these side effects from the medications you gave me. And they're known side effects, and the doctors are telling them, no, it's definitely not the medication. And they're coming to me with it, and I say, well, the FDA says that it's a known side effect.
So the missing piece
what do you do with that?
The missing piece is the relationship. And I can tell you that I'm sure her physicians, I would say none of them would have been independent. They probably worked in a group or in a hospital setting or something where they were not the ones. You have your own clinic. In Washington, D.C., of all the physicians that we have here, we have, a major Johns Hopkins, we have MedStar. How many physicians in Washington, D.C. do you think are fully independent? That means, we've got 12,000 within the Washington metropolitan area. How many do you think are fully independent, meaning that they have their own practice and they are not beholden to anyone? Just give me a number.
20 years ago, maybe. Now that all these big corporate groups are buying out all the independent groups, but maybe a handful. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you're right. There's 4. There's freaking 4, and I'm one of them.
12,000.
Yeah,
that seems wrong.
Yeah, that tells you that will only support more of this problem with this patient, and what it cuts short is that there, a physician, or a clinician or anybody, there always has to be that relationship, because it's not a relationship, or everything has become a commodity now, right? And you cannot commoditize a relationship, because I'm very much, as the way I'm operate is I'm not just like, here's your pill, see ya. No, I'm like, actually, I'll be over in about 10 minutes and I'm going to stay here until we get it right. And I'm going to follow up, and maybe you don't like me anymore, but guess what? I'm going to make sure it gets done, and, it means you have to extend yourself. And I think some people are burnt out and they can't do it, or they're not allowed to. I would tell you, we've certainly reached out. I personally have reached out to clinicians and said, hey, look, we've got this podcast coming. You should come on out. And, I don't think I can do that. I think corporate wouldn't like that. And I'm like, really? You did all of that training and you're a brilliant person, and yet
can't share it.
Can't. Wow. That sucks, and it's easy for somebody to come in. The system is broken, and that affords that nobody, unless somebody jumps out of it like you or I, it's not going to change, right? So part of this reason for doing these things is to kind of like say, put a few seeds some places and watch it grow, or like my dad said, let it burn.
Correct. I mean, it's corporate medicine. It's broken, and that's how we met. We were very impressed with how you work. Right? I have a VIP that I work with, and they had an emergency, and you were able to come there first thing in the morning, get them in the hospital, and he's a little difficult to deal with at sometimes, right? He moves on his schedule. You were very patient, spent the whole day with him, came back at night,
saw him today
in the evening,
saw
went
him
through all his charts, his records, and everything. And you don't see that with doctors. They don't have the time, they don't care, and they're not personally invested, right? If I don't know something about a case, I'm going to be up at 2 o'clock in the morning reading about the condition. I'm going to be looking for what's worked for other physicians. How are other people treating this, right? Because I need these complicated cases to get better, because I've been there and I know what it is where nobody cares, and you're just going in there and they just want to milk your insurance for whatever they can get. And like you said, it's a commodity.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to briefly segue into talking a little bit about some of your clientele. I think whenever I look at the individuals that Dr. Brown has had the privilege to work with, it's a wide variety of people, right? There have been folks at the very top of the food chain, and then individuals who are very average folks, which is awesome. And I think that scope of who you interact with on a daily basis very much informs how you practice, because you get to see the full spectrum of human existence in some ways. And so I think one of the interesting points about your story is you've been able to work with really high profile athletes, people who are at the very top of their game, former world champions. Be very interested to hear, how those relationships began to formulate for you, and what has it been like to work with people who are at the very top of the food chain when you think about someone who's probably quite healthy or athletic when it comes to their abilities. What was that relationship? How did it start, and how has it developed for you?
Definitely, I'd love to talk about it. It is fun, it's interesting, and it is. You're correct. It's not your normal patient, right? They have different needs, physically, mentally, spiritually, of your time, right? All that stuff. You need to kind of go above and beyond for your VIPs. They expect that kind of service, and that's how they live their lives, and that's how they became successful. And they kind of expect that from others, right? And like we're talking about, you want to work with other people that are at your level or at a higher level, so we can all uplift each other. That's what it's meant to be. So I've been kind of lucky growing up in the martial arts. I had a little bit of a sports medicine background. I've studied orthopedic acupuncture on top of my traditional Chinese medicine training as well, which is very like trigger point based, very biomedical based, like dry needling, that kind of work on top of the conventional Chinese medicine. So in Florida, especially where I'm at, I'm in North Broward County. We actually have one of the biggest concentrations of mixed martial artists in the whole country. So there's a couple of big camps over here. All the Brazilians are over here training. One of the athletes I'm training with right now, or I'm working with, is Vitor Belfort, former UFC champion. He's now switched over after 40 professional fights, a lifetime of fighting. He's now pro boxing. He's going into his third fight right now. So he's in one of my facilities now 4 days a week, doing IVs, his anti-aging protocol, getting ready for the fight. I treat him with acupuncture. So one example would be like an average patient, right? Maybe 10 needles to 20 needles, depending on the condition, depending on their body type, on their constitution, how much they can handle. Vitor was in my clinic last week. We might have put close to 90 needles in them. So that's something you're only going to do with professional athletes, right? When you're working with NFL guys, when you're working with basketball players, pro fighters, they have a much stronger build, a much stronger constitution, and they have a lot more injuries. They got a lot more stuff going on, and they can handle it. And when you take the average weak, frail, old, 80-year-old lady, I can't put 30, 40, 50 needles in them. One, they're not going to tolerate. Two, they might make them worse. Three, it's very confusing to the body, right? If you have all this stimulation going on in different places, it's hard for your body to say, hey, heal this first. Let's work on this problem. And, we could have a little secondary and tertiary issues. But if you're trying to treat every single joint and every single major muscle group and spirit and insomnia and calm and mental focus all at one time, most people, it just doesn't work. Athletes could kind of handle that because they're used to intense everything, right? They live their life to the max. And sometimes we have to be on call, right? And we have to be a little more flexible to their schedule, where it might be, for the normal patients. In my clinic, I generally see about 4 patients an hour. So it gives me enough time, not new cases and not very complicated cases. And obviously if somebody's complicated, if I need to spend half an hour or an hour with the patient or longer, we will, and we plan accordingly depending on what is going on with them. But if somebody's just coming in for a general follow-up, usually it's pretty simple. Once we know the patient and have a rapport, they come in, we say, hey, how you doing? Let's get to it. Okay. So, but I've worked with NFL players, professional soccer players, a bunch of different MMA guys, boxers, and a few other sports, golf, track and field, all that kind of stuff. We have a big sporting community in Florida. We have a lot of professional teams.
Yep.
So we get around. And some of the doctors that I've been trained by, some of my mentors have kind of been in the field, and they work and treat with athletes as well. So I think I've been very lucky to grow up and kind of have that exposure and that experience. And some of these guys, maybe anonymity is going to be a little bit more of a thing. They need to come in the back door and don't want to talk to anybody. And then you got the guys that,
it's a big show,
a rebel and being the star and love to come in and that whole line.
Yeah.
Right. So it's definitely fun, and it's nice to see the results. When you get to go watch their performance on TV and know that maybe you, in a very small way, contributed or helped them. I think it's a good feeling and it's enjoyable. However, I never let that get to my head. I care just as much about my VIPs as the Caribbean janitor that saved up whatever to come and see me, or a pediatric case that whether it's eczema or whatever it is that nobody else can figure out. I think it's important for us to not get lost in the or starstruck or in the limelight. Like it's very important to me personally to. We're going to treat everybody the same, right? You're going to spend, maybe a little more time with the athletes, and they're going to get more intense treatments. But the level of respect between myself and my patients, I treat everybody the same. I mean, probably even better than family, right? Because we don't always agree with family.
Well put.
Have disagreements, to put it mildly. So,
but that's your legacy.
With the majority of the patients,
that's your legacy. The legacy of what you do is what you will be known for. My only thing is, what are you giving to leave behind? Are you training younger professionals who are? Even for myself, I have to question. Who's I'm kind of the Lorax. Okay, well, when the Lorax is gone, then guess what? There's what else is there going to be left? And that's the thing that bothers me when I wake up in the morning nowadays. Is kind of like, what am I working on something that's going to be meaningful after I'm gone? So that
totally agree.
Yeah, and that's hard because it does take an individual. I'm not going to go out and find them. I'm hoping that this might be a platform where they will come, and be able to.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think this is going to reach very far. When I saw the trailer, I was fascinated. I got goosebumps. I said, "This is wow! This is exactly what we need, right?" And there's more and more documentaries coming out and stuff like that. So I think people are opening up a little bit to this kind of health. And obviously, we can't save everybody. And to answer your question, I've had probably 7 or 8 interns this year already. I have one tomorrow that's shadowing me. I think just people that I had met in the past or other students that are in school at the time. They always ask me, "Hey, can I intern?" I don't know, because honestly, the training at the school is not, as you know, not. It's different when you're in the field. Let's just put it that way. You learn more in one day in the field than you do. Right, years in school, I think. So I am training interns. I had kids late, but I have a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old now. And a 3-year-old can pretty much point out every single major organ in the body, most of the major muscle groups. He's already getting acupuncture every night before bed. He says, "Daddy, I want probiotics for the good bacteria." They'll tell you we don't need salami because it hurts our belly. So I'm definitely looking to pass it on, and I'm honored to be here. I think this is super important, and I'm going to do everything I can to help promote your show and pass it on, because people are looking for this kind of information. And if we don't try, we can't complain about it. Right? There's a lot of people on the sidelines just. Oh, the medical system, but what are you doing? And and how will you be remembered?
Well, I'm so passionate about it. I'm funding everything. So, at some point, we're trying to get a nonprofit to get this to support it. And when we get that, then there may be more opportunities, because I definitely have, funders who have been, seen what I've been working on and been like, "Hey, you want to contribute?" So, when we get that, then we can do more, get it out more. The thing is, I'm going to ask it is, Can we come down? Can we see your clinic? Can we go on a house call with you? Do you do house calls?
Not currently, just because the schedule is too busy.
Yeah.
I think when I started out, I used to. Yeah. Now it's got to the point where I couldn't, even if I want to. I have a couple other clinicians. My wife is also an acupuncturist.
Yeah.
We did our master's and our doctorate together. So sometimes I would send her, or we have another one that works kind of with us in the clinic.
Yeah.
In the future, more, it's possible we'd be able to do more of that. And I do get it, right? Because sometimes you get those patients that physically cannot leave the house, and they do need people to come to them. So I think as we expand, that's something that we'll take into consideration. But between the two kids and the two clinics now, and my other extra,
I'm just saying. Do you know how many clinicians I harass them? I harass them by asking, like, when's the last time you did a house call? Because the only reason I say that is because in one visit, the thing that struck me with my mentor, going through the medical education as it was, feeling just like another cog in the wheel, it only took one house call. And in that house call, I learned so much about that patient, about how they lived. It was just, and it still gets me every time. I'm like, what is this going to be like? And everything is different. Every individual is different. What are how do they live? And that's where my stories come from, from those experiences. But, we'd like to get down there. My brother is in Tampa, Clearwater. He is a traditional geriatric physician. And so we hop down there, and I get to harass him.
Make a little Florida trip out of it.
Yeah. And
we would love to have you. Yeah, you're welcome to both clinics. You're welcome to come to the house. We'll show you around. It's a beautiful state.
Yeah.
I think you love it. Maybe we could even get some of the pro athletes involved, or see some, get some of them if that's of interest. And you guys let me know. Come back safely from Turkey. And
yeah. And I'm also very interested in the Asian connection. Do you still have some of those? I know it may have been some time when you went to China, and do you still have those connections?
Absolutely, and I'd be happy to introduce you to some people. Yes, I have some friends in the hospitals over there that are specifically in the traditional Chinese medicine. I think that hospital in Beijing, they would love to have you there. They're very open. They love to share. It's a big difference, right? Because at one point we were talking about the medicine being banned. And now they're actually promoting it as part of their cultural heritage. Yeah. And for me, that's all great. I'm more interested in what's actually effective for the patients. Yeah. If it works for the patients, the politics, whatever, it doesn't matter to me at all. But I think they're proud. They're proud of their culture. They love Americans. They love foreigners coming in. They love to share. If you show a genuine interest, they're super happy to have people. So. And I have a few different cities and a few different hospitals that we could connect you with, and we'd be happy to talk further from there. I could get you if WeChat.
Yeah.
You gotta get on WeChat.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're on WeChat, then we can put you in touch with our friends. And
I had some.
We have people that actually speak English.
Yeah, and I do have
which is a difficulty over there.
I think I'm just trying to remember. Beijing, I think I have one client that I haven't seen in a long time, but it was I was like could WeChat them and say, hey.
Yeah. Hey, what's up? I will say, I know from having lived in Korea for 2 years and having visited China a number of times, it's much more of a culture shock than it is to go to like Europe or go somewhere that's more westernized. It's one of those things where you arrive, and for that first week, you're just like, sensory overload, just because the food, the language, everything is very, very different. And that's where, having a guide, as Dr. Brown is going to Turkey, having to, scout a location and find out who is here, who can help with transport, who can help with accommodations. Those are all super critical factors whenever you're visiting a new place, especially when you want to go and film somewhere. So that connection, to have those individuals on board, would be just unreal, phenomenal.
Yeah.
Happy to share. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Yeah.
Well, we are at a closing point, I think, for our conversation. We've had a wonderful time here with Dr. Jonathan Fields, getting to know him, his history, his education, And this is not the end, as Dr. Brown always says, right? So,
story keeps moving.
Brothers in Florida, families down there, we have
there.
an opportunity to make a trip south and see your clinics, see everything that you're doing, and interact with some of the clientele that you have built up over the last number of years. But just want to say thank you very much for taking the time with us this evening. It's always appreciated. And again, these stories, that's the root of all of this, is just to get people's voices out there and provide a platform for people to share their story. So thank you, Dr. Fields. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I really appreciate it as well. I think this is super important what you all are doing, and I support you 150 million%. Whatever I can do to help, I'm on board, and it would be an honor to have you all down here and show you around with it.
All right, great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
We're tuning off for this episode of Earnest Medicine. Stay tuned. We'll be back with another episode before you know it. I think we've got like 2 more lined up for this week, or even before Dr. Brown's out of town, heading to Turkey. And so very excited to have you along for this journey, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.
And if you happen to find any of this interesting, or more importantly, if you want to collaborate, check out the link below so that you can send us your comments, any stories you may have, anything, we're happy to entertain it. And this is really about us going on a journey together.